Hello, my friends. Welcome back to another episode of the ThePCelitist. My name is Woodsie. So it's been a long week. I've had so much to do at work. I was totally just mentally exhausted last weekend. And actually, Monday was no different. So it's just been a lot of hard work. Our company, the company I work at, we are growing. We're expanding very rapidly. And that means that everyone's work bandwidth is basically pushed to the limit. And it's a small company, so everyone's got to kind of do more than their job description really provides, and it's a good thing because the company's growing, obviously, but it's also a lot of hard work, and I don't get those opportunities as much as I would like to kind of zone out and kind of be on autopilot at work. I feel like that's been happening very little as of late, just because of the sheer amount of work, and it's exhausting just being on all day for 8 hours, just concentrating all day. So it's tough, but we're finally catching up, I think, this week, and that means I want to catch up with other things, like doing recordings for videos and talking to you guys about video games and all the cool stuff happening. But I wanted to thank Singularity and Greg Stefanakis and Hyperkinetic Nerd for commenting on my last video. I really appreciate it. I really appreciate it when you guys, if you're a listener and you're not subscribed, even though, honestly, I don't know how you're finding this video if you're not subscribed. Mostly because I'm terrible at marketing my own channel. I have no idea how to do it. My father, who's a listener, and I'm sure he's listening to this video right now, oh, Dad. He gave me some advice, on trying to, however it works, how search engines pick you up. There's a word for it he totally used, and I can't remember now. But I really need to get better at that, because I would like the channel to grow. I'd like to see new faces and see progress. I know I've only been back for like a couple weeks, but that'd be cool. I think it was Dreary or Spider who mentioned, have I ever thought about starting a Patreon account? Because I mentioned I had no money to upgrade my old computer, old Bessie over here. I love my computer. I'm touching it right now. I'm patting it on its what I think is its head, but it's just a tower. Anyway, a Patreon account is like Kickstarter, but on a continuous basis. Like, you subscribe, you say, I'm going to give you $2 a day or whatever, and then there's like tiers, like, if you give me $10 a month, I will have a Google Plus, exclusive interview with you. I don't know, stuff like that. Could be interesting. I feel like there's so many other things I need to do to the channel to get it to a position where I'd want to actually market it in that kind of fashion. I would never want to put up paywalls where people aren't getting content, but I don't know. I think it would be interesting. I've said many times in the past, I know we haven't actually talked about video games. I know many times in the past, I've said, this is a work-a-day guy trying to just talk about video games and get that out there, but, if I could do this as a job, that would be amazing. I would do it very happily. Anyway, so last time on the channel, we talked about a few different things, and Singularity had some great points. He was talking about we were talking about like WoW builds, or we were talking about meta builds actually, and how that could really ruin a multiplayer experience when you have too many people who are all these number crunchers. Actually, they're worse than number crunchers. There are people who go to forums and read about people who claim they crunch numbers and that they know like the best way to do X, and everyone should do that, and somehow that permeates throughout that society of that game, and that's the right way to do it, and there's no other right way to do it. And you know what? Until someone else actually tries something else that works, and then everyone's like, oh no, there's other ways the way to do it. And you're damn you if you're the guy trying to try something different, right? And he mentioned that Singularity mentioned that he had his World of Warcraft experience ruined due to that, and I completely understand. Now, it didn't ruin my World of Warcraft experience, but you know what? I completely understand why other people and their stupid opinions. This is an opinion show. Should I be saying that? I'm gonna say it anyway. Their stupid opinions can ruin your game and make it not fun. And that's, probably where Adam Ames thinks in his head. He's like, I know, that's why I don't play multiplayer games, because of the idiots out there. And there are many. There are many. No one blames him for that. I think Greg Stefanakis had an interesting point in one of his comments. And it came back to, because I was talking about how I felt like that an art form kind of grows up, or at least that seems to be the perception, that once it starts making like heftier commentary and tackling bigger issues, that now it's kind of a legitimate art form. And he said that he didn't see games as being a venue for that necessarily, because there's so much player choice in games. At least good games have player choice. And when you introduce that, you don't really get your way all the time to really just talk about your message, and that's maybe not the best forum for it. And I agree with that, definitely. I think it's a good point. And it's to his point, I remember at GDC Los Angeles, like GDC Next or something, I believe it was GDC Next. I listened to a speaker who, by trade, he's a writer, writes novels or what have you, and he's written for some video games. And his whole talk that he gave was kind of about how it's frustrating to write for video games because you only get so much leeway to guide the player and to really influence the player, because at a certain point the player actions have to take over, and you don't get as much control over your audience, basically. And I think it was funny, like, I think everyone in the room, or at least myself, I was kind of waiting for him to get to the point, but that was his point. The point is that as a writer, it's tough with video games. And I remember asking him the question. I stood up, and because there's always a Q&A after, and I basically made the statement more like that the writing you get with video games is kind of the landscape of the game, and then at a certain point you have to stop, and you have to let the player kind of take over at a certain point. And he disagreed with my premise. He said that he doesn't see that as writing, which was weird. But like just writing lore and landscape and characters like that to him wasn't writing. I think he meant that there had to be like a front to back, like having control over the protagonist through the whole way, maybe, is what his point was. But I think he would agree with Greg that it's not the best landscape to make a very direct point about something, because at a certain point you have to let the reins off and let the player do whatever. So it's interesting. It's an interesting idea. Hyperkinetic Nerd, he wanted me to talk about, he asked me what my thoughts were on FPS capping, and he gave me a link, and I think it went to a Kotaku story on the 50 FPS police or 30 FPS police, which was something started by Total Biscuit, I guess. And I don't know how actively he moderated this community, but it sounds like the community kind of took over, and they created a group on Steam. I consider myself a gamer. Like, I consider myself such a PC elitist, right? And I don't know anything about this stuff. I'm like so out of the loop. It just goes, I don't know why. It just goes so beyond me, like over my head or around my head. I don't know where it goes, but I just don't pay attention to this stuff, I guess. Like social groups on Steam is what they were. Their curators on Steam was this particular group. And he even mentioned that he created the name as like kind of a tongue-in-cheek thing, like, oh, we're going to maintain a list of games that don't put arbitrary restrictions on the frames per second, because PC gamers hate it when, due to a console's limitations, that they put a 30 FPS limiter on the game programming and doesn't let the PC gamers who could easily handle much higher frames per second, let the hardware run at higher speed and basically, run it the fastest it can. And the backlash comes where this particular group was very aggressive and would get on the cases of smaller developers who only ran at like 30 frames per second or whatever. Even though they're like a PC only game, it doesn't matter. Like they're the 30 FPS police. To answer Hyperkinetic's nerd's question offhand, in short, would be that I look, old Bessie here. She's 5 years old. I can't consistently keep 60 frames per second. I would like to. I think it would be frustrating if I bought like a $60 AAA title and it would only go to 30 frames per second. However, I don't generally buy AAA titles. I just don't. I can't even imagine spending $60 on a video game, but I just don't play the general AAA title. And so I guess most games I play are either PC-centric or PC only, and I guess I don't run into this problem that often, I guess would be the biggest reason. But there's one thing that I don't think the article in question really, and I'll link it on this video so you guys don't have to go searching for it, but I don't think the article really pointed out enough that they kept using arbitrary as the word, like arbitrary limits on frames per second. And I don't know if arbitrary is the right word, because they're not arbitrary. They're calculated, actually, because the games on the consoles, can only run for 30 frames per second. And they don't want there to be a quote-unquote superior version on the PC, so they limit it as well. Now, that's a reason, not an excuse kind of situation. They shouldn't do that. But here's the other thing. That's one issue. The other issue is that, and I mean, I know very little about game programming. I'm not a game programmer by any stretch of the imagination, right? But even in the little I've done in that industry, and actually like going to a few shows and whatnot, and talking to game developers and reading about video game development, kind of my whole life. I guess maybe I know more than I think I do, but it's always been understood in my mind that the frames per second a game can run at is not literally just a flip of a switch. And I don't know if everyone understands that, or if, I would think that any media outlet should make that known who are talking to these people, who are talking to game developers. And I would think they would say, it's not arbitrary. It's not something we just set and forget kind of situation. An engine is built with frame rates in mind. And I think even to be more specific, there are games that maybe utilize a lot of 2D graphics and 2D animations, and they don't run at a higher frame. They just will not. The animation is built to run at a certain FPS. So the whole game runs at a certain FPS. So it won't go over. They program it not to go over a certain amount, because the aesthetic of the game just doesn't allow it. So I guess my point is that to me it's a silly way to determine a game's value, its face value. Because if it's a huge graphics like monster that you expect to kind of really push your machine, and you buy it because you want to see your machine like chew it up and spit it out and run at a beautiful frames, well, that would be frustrating, sure. But I think to have like a curator group centered around it, and to basically compile a list of all the games that aren't running at 60 frames per second, you really have to ask the question of why they're not doing it. So, I mean, here's the thing. I mean, ultimately, do I understand why the enthusiast would be upset when they can't run a AAA title at above 30 frames per second or whatever it's capped at? Absolutely, I would be bothered myself, but I think that it's just one of so many factors, and that it's just something that needs to be investigated, and something, if it's so critical to you, it's just something you should be looking up before you buy a game, and that's it. Like, it's not critical to me, so I generally don't bother to look. I mean, old Bessie here, she could barely get above 30 or 40 playing The Witcher 3, and I played that as often as I can get around to it. It doesn't bother me that it drops frame rate sometimes. I wish it ran higher, but whatever. It doesn't. You know, I love you, though. I love you, Bessie. Anyway, I hope you guys have a great week. It's only Tuesday, so we got a few more days to go. I'll try to get to that weekend. I hope you enjoyed listening to this video. If you would please give me a little thumbs up. Subscribe if you haven't. If you have any advice for me, we're still in the rebuilding phase, folks. I'm still trying to figure this out. It's not the easiest thing to kind of reformat the show, but I'm trying my best. So if you have any advice, please let me know. You can always message me. Some of you have my Steam stuff, you know. Go ahead and let me know. I will see you guys next time.